Please look at this. Okay, now look at this church. Also, look at this. If you hadn't already been spoiled by the title of this video, you may well have thought that these images were filmed somewhere in Spain, or Portugal, or even Latin America. But that's the thing. This is Sri Lanka. Specifically, this is a small town along the southern coast of Sri Lanka known as Galle. And my visit to Galle changed everything about the way that I think of this country. My name is Josh, and I'm a digital nomad who lives in a different country every single month. Join me as I make my way south from Sri Lanka's capital city of Colombo to the city of Galle and discuss the pros and cons of visiting a city that represents such a mashup of global cultures. My story begins with a train ride, and that makes sense because Sri Lanka is home to one of the most famous train rides in all of Asia. You've probably even seen pictures of it. You know, influencers hanging out the side of a train car, wearing a pretty dress as the gorgeous landscape passes by. Yeah, it's that train ride. The train I'm talking about actually runs between Kandy and Ella, and is easily one of the most iconic things to do in all of Sri Lanka. Well, here's the thing. I did not ride it. In fact, I was unable to ride it entirely due to a recent landslide that had rendered parts of the track unusable. Fortunately, it's not the only incredibly beautiful and fun train ride in Sri Lanka. Another, less famous train runs south along the coast from Sri Lanka's largest city of Colombo to Galle and Weligama. Now, aside from just being beautiful and practical and fun, these trains are relevant to this video in other ways. Why? Because they were initially introduced to Sri Lanka as part of British colonization way back in 1864. They were constructed so that the British could more easily move coffee and tea from the plantations in the mountains down to the Colombo port. And if this concept of colonization gives you the ick, it should. Colonization is a very complicated topic, to say the least. And when it comes to Galle, we're just getting started. A few hours after boarding the train, I finally arrived into Galle and immediately did what most tourists do. I grabbed a tuk-tuk from the train station and hightailed it directly to my hotel in Galle Fort. While there is an entire bustling and modern city outside the walls of Galle Fort, the fort itself is really where all the tourism is. It was designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1988 for being the best example of a European fortified city in South or Southeast Asia. And given that the fort is, well, you know, a fort, essentially the main thing that you do in Galle is sort of just mosey around the super walkable streets and check it all out. Namely, there are two main portions of the fort to explore here. The walls of the fort, you know, the forty part of the fort, and then the inside of the fort, the stuff that they were originally trying to protect from all the scary outside invaders. Walking along the fort wall itself is gorgeous. The primary attraction here is the Galle Lighthouse. It's still operational to this day, and it is the icon of the city. I also appreciated that there is this sort of secret beach right behind the lighthouse. Imagine two lovers meeting here at night, illuminated only by the light from the lighthouse. Okay? Are you with me? Very romantic, very clandestine, and if you're lucky, you might just see one of these. This is either a monitor lizard or a Pokemon. You'll find some museums and such that you can visit along the fort walls as well. I did stop inside one of them, which featured a selection of paintings, which sort of highlights the history of the fort itself. I admit that I didn't stay here for very long because it was a super hot day and I was absolutely dripping with sweat, but it's a fun and affordable way to sort of get a quick rundown of the fort's history, which I appreciated. These fort walls were originally built by the Portuguese way back in the 1500s. However, when the Dutch took over, I guess they were unimpressed because they rebuilt the fort to take on the form that it represents today. Speaking of the Dutch influence, one of the most famous Dutch structures that continues to operate to this day is the Dutch Reformed Church, which is one of the oldest Protestant churches in the whole country, having been built in the year 1755. Clearly, Galle features a ton of colonial history, and it's really fascinating to see how it's all shaken out between the Portuguese style of housing, the British railways, and the Dutch fortifications and churches. But at the end of the day, Galle is not in Europe, it's in Sri Lanka. And while learning about and observing the colonial history of the city is interesting and important, I think it's equally important to be able to appreciate the Sri Lankan culture that truly is everywhere within the city in the modern day. As you walk within the walls of Galle Fort, you're going to find a lot of really cute souvenir shops and cafes and restaurants, and while it might be easy to look over these things as just another collection of tourist traps, it is actually within these places that you'll find the true heart of Sri Lanka. In the cafes, you can experience the joy of Sri Lankan tea. It's grown all over the country, and Sri Lankans are super proud of it, as they should be. In fact, I visited a whole tea plantation in the Ella region of Sri Lanka, which was an incredible experience. I'll talk more about that in an upcoming video, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. In other shops, you can see elements of Sri Lanka's incredible woodworking, especially through these Raksha masks. They're available for sale all over the country, but if you learn about their history, it's such a beautiful and unique and totally Sri Lankan aspect of the culture. And of course, you can't walk more than a few meters through Galle without seeing multiple authentic restaurant options. My favorite local food experience in Galle was at the Lucky Fort restaurant, which I spoke about at length in my Sri Lanka food video, and it is an absolute must visit. However, it was hardly the only food that I ate there. I also had the chance to experience another fantastic collection of curries from a restaurant basically right across the street called NISSA. It's sort of high-end-ish, and it perhaps doesn't have quite the same homey vibe that Lucky Fort has, but I still had a really amazing meal here nonetheless. Eating is always my favorite cultural activity in any country, but suffice it to say that the town of Galle does local Sri Lankan food super well. In fact, I feel like Galle represents all aspects of Sri Lanka super well, even despite the fact that it is, by and large, a direct representation of a long history of European colonialism. As a global traveler, I'm faced with reminders of colonialism pretty much every day. Places in which a great portion of the visible history is a direct result of the harmful occupation and colonization of outside nations. Places like Galle. And while that is overall a negative, there is a beauty in seeing history reclaimed. I mean, the fact that you can walk through a fort like this one, that may have been originally created by the Portuguese and Dutch, and see it today filled with Sri Lankans selling their own tea, their own relics, and sharing their own food with people from around the world is remarkable. It is a beautiful thing. And yes, Galle may be the most European-style town in all of Sri Lanka, but at the end of the day, all of that is just outerwear for a deep layer of local resilience that sits underneath it all. So go to Galle. Go to appreciate its beauty. Go to appreciate its history. But most of all, go to appreciate its people. Because at the end of the day, it is not a European town in Sri Lanka at all. It's a Sri Lankan town that faced a European invasion and came out on top.